Thank you so much, Rekuno, for the words of wisdom and the impartation right there. Next on stage, I'll be calling a very young, beautiful lady, Miss Kumo Molobia, who will be giving us more info or more knowledge under the Black History family.
Dumelang Bagolo, I would like to acknowledge and appreciate the Association of Study of African American Life and History. I'd also love to acknowledge and appreciate the efforts that Mema Gauta Molokwane is actually putting into putting this whole thing together. I am thankful for the opportunity to be with you all today. It is such a great opportunity and honor for me. My name is Kumo Molobie, and my topic is about preservation of heritage of a Black family. The speaker who came before me said something that really hit hard. He said, it was Rajoj Kuno, he said something like, Africa is rich, yet poor. That got me thinking so much. And I actually believe that with the preservation of heritage and our history, we can actually address this notion that says Africa is rich yet poor. Why is it important to preserve heritage? I believe heritage brings or gives us a source of identity. I also believe heritage brings with it time-tested solutions for conflict resolution, reconciliation, and general social well-being. I also think the preservation of history yields benefit in terms of the wealth of the nation. When I talk of a source of identity, when we preserve our heritage, we get to know exactly where we come from. It is very important. There's this say that I love that says, if you do not know where you come from, you'll never know where you are going. And therefore, for me, it is important that we know where we come from. When I talk about where we come from, I'm basically referring to the origins, where we come from as Africans. And every now and then you will hear me making reference to the Royal Bafokeng nation. I'm not necessarily a spokesperson, but because I am from this nation, you can generally say I know it better. That's where my identity is actually. So when I talk of origins and where we come from, if we are to look at the case of the Royal Bafokeng nation, we hear that many moons ago, they traveled from up in Egypt down into the southern side of Africa, and they ended up at the place called Rustenburg Valley. So we hear that they arrived in this area in the 15th century. When they got here, they were led by a certain Kosi Tsukudu, and they settled in an area called Hanabe. It is very important for me as a young Mofokeng to actually know these things. There's this place called Hanabe. If you were to visit it today, you will see that there still remains of how they used to build their houses. You still find stone walls that depict, even their social life. You see where they used to keep their animals. You see where they used to the kraals were, where the graves were, where the main houses were, and so forth. It's a very interesting architecture if you were to actually go experience it. The interesting thing about it is that most of the buildings around there, they're actually round in a circular sort of way. And if you do look at our crest, the current crest, you will see that the stone walls are actually depicted in there. Why is it important for me to mention this? Currently, we have what is called Khotla, which I'm going to narrate more on it a bit later. But when we go to Khotla, we actually sit in a sort of circular setting. Why? Because when we're sitting like that, it just basically says no one is more important than the other. It says we're all equal. It says all our opinions and suggestions matter. Therefore, no one is more important than the other. And for me, it comes back from the 15th century when the Bafokeng settled in the area. And so it's important that youth today get to know of these things. Source of identity. When you talk of source of identity, again, we're talking about our values, our beliefs, our aspirations, where we want to see ourselves as a nation going forward. We also talk of cultural and spiritual heritage. We talk of upholding family values. Botho. Now, in our African, or rather Royal Bafokeng Nation family, I'll just give an example of how we are structured to give you an idea of how this big family actually came to be. So we've got a nuclear family, which would be our mother, father, and the children. Okay, and for example, they belong to a Molobye family. Now, this Molobye family, they've got cousins and brothers and so forth. When they come together as an extended family, they form what is called a kotla. This kotla is led by what we call kosana, a headsman or chief. Now, when these different kotlas come together from all the different villages, they all make up what is called the entire Morafi, which is the whole nation of the Royal Bafokeng, which I may safely call the whole big family of Bafokeng. And then we have a Khosi, which is the king, who is sort of the father of this bigger family. Now, this particular family called the Royal Bafokeng, and cascading it to the nuclear family, the smaller segment of it, they've got family values, they've got things that they believe in, they've got principles that they adhere to. And these are actually embedded from way back in their history. There is a way that Bahulu or the elders used to raise their children, which, if it's translated from the nuclear family to the Khotla and to the general Murafi, can actually help in terms of conflict resolution and so forth. And so it is important that we preserve such principles, that we preserve such values. It could be written, it could be narrated, it could be recorded in latest technologies that we have today, but it is very, very important that we preserve and we record these. Another aspect of our heritage, as I mentioned earlier, is time-tested solutions. Now, we have been blessed as the Royal Bafokeng Nation to have visionary leadership, throughout the existence of the nation, from time immemorial. I'll give an example of a certain mostly celebrated Khosi, which is Khosi Mokgatle. Now, Khosi Mokgatle ruled around the mid-1800s, when the politics around the country, around South Africa, were very, very unfair towards black family, if I may say, because there were a lot of colonialization, there were, forceful removals. So indigenous people would be forcefully removed from their land and so forth. Now, Khosi saw this as an opportunity to sort of safeguard the wealth of his people. So what he did was he called the big family meeting, I believe discussed amongst themselves to say, these are the challenges. We are about to lose our land. The generations that are coming after us might not necessarily have a home that they will proudly sort of belong to. And after deliberations and so forth, they all agreed that every single member of the community will actually take part in somehow raising money so that they can buy. Can you imagine buying the land that actually belongs to you? But anyway, that's a topic for another day. So they came together, agreed on what to do in terms of raising money so they can buy the land. And one of the things that they did was to send men to Kimberley. Now, Kimberley is a small diamond town about 1,000 kilometers from the Royal Bafokeng Nation. This is in the 1800s, okay? So men are expected to go to Kimberley. You can just imagine, there were no cars, no trains, no buses, no choppers, unfortunately. And they also had maybe an option of maybe donkey or horse carts, maybe to an extent even walk to Kimberley. I've actually learned that amongst the Royal Bafokeng Nation, once we put our mind to something, which is something that I really appreciate, once we put our mind to something, we actually go all out for it. I can just imagine those men carrying their little bags, some food for the road, trekking towards Kimberley, 1,000 kilometers from here, facing all different weather conditions and wild animals and whatever that you can imagine. I mean, we're talking the 1800s here. They all went to Kimberley, worked in those diamond mines. And at that time, even the mining or the production around the mine was not as advanced as it is today. I can imagine, I've heard that today when you go to a shaft in a mine, there's a little cage that you get into and then it takes you directly to the lowest part of the mine and so forth. Then there was nothing like that. They had to use even the most primitive of equipment to mine out the precious stones in that area. And that again is another risk. I believe there are people who actually lost their lives in the Kimberley mines. Why am I mentioning this whole thing? I want to show you that everything that a black family puts their mind and heart to and they strongly believe in, they can actually achieve. So these men went, worked under those difficult circumstances rather, and then they raised the money, came back home. And when they came back home, because in the Bafokeng there's this thing that is called communal benefit. We all believe that if I succeed, I'm succeeding not just for myself, but for my neighbor, for my cousins and so forth. In fact, for the entire nation. It has been like that through our generation, that it's not just about us. And I do believe that generally in a black family, it's always like that, you know. If I succeed, it's not just for myself, but it's for the greater sort of family, extended family. So they came back, put the money in a kitty, all of them selflessly so, and purchased the land. And they had title deeds for the land. Little did they know that the investment that they did in the mining, in the Kimberley mines, would later yield, or rather result in them having occupying land that is one of the richest platinum deposits. And so the land was bought, hence we celebrate it today. Can you imagine how things would have been if this story was not recorded in any way, if it had not been preserved in any way, if we didn't even know about it? Can you imagine how we would take advantage of the wealth that is in this nation without a care in the world of appreciating and acknowledging, you know, the efforts that our elders did many, many years ago? Can you imagine how it would be easy for an outsider to just come and take advantage of it, because the people who are residing in it don't know any and they don't have any value to it? It is therefore very, very important that we encourage the preservation of our heritage and our stories as we know it, in our language, you know, where possible. I also made a point that says the preservation of history, of heritage rather, sort of safeguards the wealth of the nation. And I gave an example of the mining, for example. But there's more. We've got natural attractions in the RBN. In fact, I believe all over Africa. All over the world, actually, there's beautiful natural attractions which indigenous people ought to preserve. We've got beautiful mountains, rivers, plants, you know, beautiful weather and so forth, that I believe if we do not tell stories of such heritage, we will definitely lose it. When I talk of wealth of the nation, I also refer to natural and cultural heritage. I'm talking about movable and immovable heritage. I'm talking about tangible and intangible heritage. When I talk of tangible heritage, I'm referring basically to what I just said, the land, the buildings, historic buildings and so forth. If you do get a chance to come and visit us at the Royal Bafokeng, you'll also learn of historical sites where our forefathers actually would pray for rain. We have such sites that we are preserving, where our forefathers fought with other nations to protect the land. We have such site, we are preserving such site. We have grave sites of our royalties. There's just a lot. Way back in the late 1800s, we had missionaries coming in our village. After Jose Mokgatle had actually heard of the impact that they were making in other communities. He went and got them, brought them here to come and help us with a few things. Not necessarily to take over, okay, but to help us with a few things. We've got sites that are preserved that depict such stories. So it is very, very important that we preserve these things. Why should we preserve such tangible heritage? One, they pose a very nice opportunity for economic benefits. We can actually develop our tourism around these particular sites. It is beautiful to visit a place and you get to see, you know, the physical structures that represent the history of a particular nation. We also have intangible heritage, which I strongly believe they deserve to be preserved. When I talk of intangible heritage, I'm referring to the food that we eat. I'm referring to the dress code and the meanings, because if you were to see a black Motswana girl dressed up, whatever that they would have on, it would have a meaning. If you see a young Motswana boy dressed up, their attire would definitely speak to you. It would be different from the way a Motswana married woman would actually dress like, and an older gentleman would dress like. It is important that we preserve such things. And I'll give you an example why it's important to, particularly when it comes to attire. So way back, the married women would wear a skirt. I wish it was possible for me to display. they would wear a skirt, which at the back would be a bit longer. So the piece of cloth at the back would be slightly longer, all right? And there is a seane, a proverb that says, Mosadi ga inama, wa ba tshepile mokotlolo, right? So mokotlolo is that a piece of cloth that is extending at the back. Now, when you look at the fashion today, we actually wear such dresses. You know, there are beautifully designed dresses which sort of elongate at the back. We find them stylish and fashionable and so forth. But if you were to know the history of that, it actually started as a piece of, a skirt rather, of a married Motswana woman, and it has a meaning to it because you married, you have to protect and cover yourself up, and when you're cleaning or busy with housework, you are bound to sort of bend, and when you bend, you safely bend because then you know you are covered, you know, as you bend. So we should be preserving such things as they influence, you know, even things that we are doing today. So basically that is that's what I wanted to give to you, to say it is important that we preserve our heritage. It's important that we preserve even the plants that we have. I'm not sure if I don't think actually in big developed cities you are to find certain plants that we find here at home. We've got bokopani, we've got, which is aloe, we've got lingana, which is now very popular, especially with the advent of COVID-19. I'm not sure if you follow the news, but if you do, you learn that a country called Madagascar actually promoted this particular plant so much when we were hit by this virus, and it yielded very good results. So when we didn't know, you know, the properties that this plant actually has, you know, we wouldn't have a solution for corona. And I actually feel if we do preserve, you know, and we even scientifically prove the properties that are in this particular plant, we can actually solve any other sickness or virus that we could be facing in the future. It is very important that we preserve and document this heritage of ours. There's a Setswana proverb that says, "Tlhako ya morago e gata fa ya pele e gatileng teng." This basically means the generations that will come later will actually walk right where the generations that came first have walked. I gave an example with the attire, the female skirt. I gave an example with the plants, the medicinal plants. I also gave example of the leadership. Imagine if the whole history of Kgosi Mokgatle is recorded and preserved and it's taught to our young people, and they get to learn that a black family means communal, a black family means unity, and we teach this to generations that are coming later or after us. It gets embedded in them. They sort of relate with that. It is part of their identity, and they get to uphold that going forward. Don't you think some of these issues that we are facing today would be resolved? I think so. And so it is important that we come up with ways to sort of preserve and document this heritage of ours. It could be in documentaries, it could be in movies, it could be in just oral evidence that is collected and recorded. And you know, we could even introduce this heritage preservation to schools and school curriculum so that our kids grow up knowing what it is that their ancestors believed in, how they lived their lives, how they were able to survive all those years and challenges that they had, you know, with no developments that we have today. I believe it is very important. And I'll repeat again, if you do not know where you come from, you will never know where you're going. If we don't know what Kgosi Mokgatle and his peers and all the other kings who came after him stood for, it will be difficult for any other leader that will take over from here, because it is important that you know what they upholded as far as conflict resolution, what they upholded as far as social wellness, well-being. It is very important. So for posterity's sake, for legacy's sake, to appreciate and acknowledge the efforts of our ancestors, you know, for blueprint of our identity, for preservation for future wealth, solutions for future problems, I strongly believe and I'm convicted that it is important that we do preserve these histories. And I'm thankful for the programs that Asalh is actually I'm doing, because it basically is preserving. We wouldn't have known of what Dr. Carter did had it not been the preservation of history and heritage. We wouldn't have known what Ore Mandela did. We wouldn't have known. Today we are recording and we're preserving even what Bome Mahauta they're doing. Many generations to come will actually celebrate that there were people who came before us who saw it fit and important to record and preserve these things for us, so that we, that generation, are able to forge ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Auskumo Molobe, with a beautiful, soft voice. I think you all heard that. I'll be calling on stage without any waste of time. I'm talking here ga Hosana, the Chief Koketso Rakudu, who will be giving us more of his presentation.
Let me take this time and greet you all in this afternoon. Trust that you are keeping well as we are continuing to fight with the uncommon enemy called coronavirus. My name is Koketso Akudu. I am the youngest serving chief of the Royal Bafokeng Nation, leading the community of Tsiting. I am an educational psychologist specializing in curriculum development, for skills development in South Africa, and a lecturer for social sciences and developmental studies. I am honored this afternoon to be part of the 2021 Association of the Study of African American Life History Conference, hosted by Me Mahauta Molokwane in the Royal Bafokeng Nation, Phokeng, Rustenburg. Today we are celebrating life, and life is a celebration. As we celebrate this auspicious paragon of excellency, we remember February 1926, where Harvard-trained historian, well known as the father of the Black history, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who established this kind of initiatives. And also, he believed that education, it is not preparation for life, it is life itself. As we celebrate the month of Black history, it is also important to mention that we should start also to offer technical skills development courses which are able to solve our future challenges we might find ourselves in. As we are celebrating Black History Month, we also remember the late King Kgosi Molwane Molutlehi, who gave birth to the vision of Lebone College of the Royal Bafokeng Nation. This is also a sign that we believe in education as a nation. Lebone College of the Royal Bafokeng Nation, it is a beacon of what is possible, but the state schooling systems, it is where progress needs to be made. A quality education is both a critical tool for the people to fulfill their potential and constitutional guaranteed right. An educated community is essential to our nation's prosperity and to our visions for a better standard of living for all. Early childhood is perhaps the most important aspect of human development and access to quality learning opportunities during this fundamental period. It is very critical to our children's ability to flourish and prosper. As the Royal Bafokeng Nation community in Phokeng, we have therefore prioritized the need to improve access to quality preschool facilities and will form partnerships to do so. The ability to read and write is essential well-being and the ability function today. The Vision Plan 2035 states that all Bafokeng should be in possession of this set of tools, and we are therefore targeting universal literature in the nation before the year 2035. One thing we should also remind ourselves this month, it is the fact that we should not only focus on community development, but we should focus on the personal growth of the organization, because the father of the Black history believed that you cannot build an organization, you need to build the people, and people will build the organization. In that way, the economic impact of the education in our communities will be now a key anchor which is used to establish transformational growth of the communities, but it should not start there. It should start with the leaders of the community. Ladies and gentlemen, as the theme states that family representative identity, diversity, it is also important to establish the transformational growth in our communities, which will assist us to have what we call a tangible impact. The multi-year strategy of the UN Global is to drive awareness and action in support of the achieving the sustainable development goals by the year 2030. And with this kind of initiatives, it really shows that we are in the right direction. We are not writing history all over again. We are continuing with what the father of the Black history believed in. We are making sure that the history becomes more relevant and it becomes our lifestyle. In conclusion, let me say this words, that the word of the Lord says in the book of Galatians chapter 4, it says, we are the children of the promise. But I want us to understand this afternoon that the fulfillment of the promise does not depend upon us. As the chief of the Royal Bafokeng Nation, our vision statement is clear, and I'm excited to be part of this association with young people or young activists like Mema Khauta Molokwane. We are definitely sure that indeed we are taking back the agenda where we belong. One other thing that the father of the Black history believed in is that he said we should emphasize Negro. We should not emphasize the Negro history, but we should emphasize the Negro in the history. We are not just only ending here, we are going to host the school lecture across our schools in the Royal Bafokeng Nation, where we emphasize the importance of our youngsters to believe in themselves as Black families. There's no one who can come and do this for us. But I want to take this time and appreciate Memolokwane for aligning the vision and for starting with the direction to say these are the first steps to take. I am looking forward to interacting with all our schools as this will become a lifestyle. It is not only going to become a once-off thing, it is going to become a lifestyle. As I'm going to sit down, I want to plead with all of you that make sure that you follow the COVID-19 regulations, sanitize, and then wear your mask at all times. God bless you. Kia leboha. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being a beautiful audience. Thank you so much, Jose, for a wonderful speech. You know, it is that time that I enjoy the most. You know, as an MC, sometimes you do feel as if you're a teacher, because now it's the question time whereby I'll be giving each and every panelist 2 questions to answer. Rekuno, from the speech that you said, I heard you talking about power that has been handed back. Now, I'm a bit concerned about the power that has been handed back. Do you still remember, there is a saying that says, the family that prays together stands together, but the family that is divided, it falls apart. So now, what I'm trying to say, or where is my question leading to, is the fact that I understand that we have power back to us, but why do we have so much femicide? Why do we have so much domestic violence, kids getting killed? Now, how are we going to work on this, trying to get our people back to their roots and understanding who they are?
Yeah, there's still a question of why in this continent we still find that Africans as leaders are not united and they're still having fights amongst themselves. The reality, it goes back to, in answering, it goes back to what I initially said, that the system of governance is very critical, because when power was handed over to Africans, they had lived before how they were traditionally governing themselves. And there were no such as issues that we find today, where there are coups and one nation finding the other and forgetting that they are Africans. It's simply because they are trying to govern Africa on the basis of how the so-called democratic system was imposed on them, and completely moving away from how Africans structure their own governance. And hence I keep on saying that there's a need to find a balance between the system of governance that Africans developed then, and then what was introduced by the foreign powers when Africa finally got their countries back and their power back from the colonialists. And therefore, I still strongly believe that the Africans themselves should craft how, and the constitutions that actually fits into their way of governance, so that they are able to can meet and discuss this thing on the understanding of how their culture should dictate. Now, you still do find, of course, the abuses, as the question was raised in Africa. Now, these abuses happen because there is a constitutions that is imposed where the constitutions determines how Africa should resolve their disputes, and even the abuses that are caused by either the leaders themselves or African to another African. There is no system that based on their culture and traditions to be able to deal with such abuses. Everything seems to be based on the constitution that leads them to the court of laws. And then you know, when you go to the courts, it's all the interpretation of the laws. And you must also know that there is this fine line which is also to be determined between what the law says and what is justice. So you may find in many cases that dealing with these abuses and how to convict such people who cause these abuses are based on the laws, which are not really crafted by the Africans, but are based on the foreign constitutional system of how to deal with such matters. And again, the leadership in our families is also been somehow obliterated by the fact that they are not being given the opportunity to deal with this thing through their what we call when there is an abuse or some families that have dispute over issues. As a family, as we said before, a family is not just the mother, the child, and the father in the one house. It's much bigger than that. So we need to go back as Africans and utilize the system of what the family is and deal with these matters through their family structures. In Moma Khotling, in Modi Kutling, and in fact even more relatives themselves. So there are these processes which, if we stick to those processes, I think we are able to can bring order in terms of the dispute between families and bring unity. The question of our ancestors being classified as demons, I think is ill-placed, completely ill-placed, and is being preached to our own African people as our ancestors being the demons. Remember what I said, that the Africans themselves were the creations, in fact, the creations of God himself. Now, how could we as Africans or our forefathers be regarded as demons when in fact they are in the image of God himself? I think that question is completely irreplaced, and I think it has to be completely eradicated from the minds of African people. And the last and very critical as well, which was raised, if I remember vividly, is the issue of slave queens. I think it came out very strong. You've got slave queens today, or people who really make a living in selling their bodies, which is a very unfortunate situation. So as the abuse of drugs by young people. These are issues where, because of the lack of systems in our own traditional ways of dealing with such issues, it goes back to that abuse. If we continue to use the African traditions and cultures how to deal with these things, you must remember these things. In fact, they have come very strong recently, when there is a very strong emphasis on the so-called democratic systems introduced, and again making it punishable for our cultures and traditions to practice in order to to deal with the issues of the so-called slave queens, or people who are actually selling their bodies. We must go back and say, because the Africans will then go back and say, what is the root cause of this? There are a number of factors that are the causes of this drug abuse, women abuse, And also, which is a very painful thing, of our sisters, our kids, turning into what you call as slave queens. We know what the causes are. That's a reality. We know what the causes are. It's all about, economic sufficiency. And the economic sufficiency, as is determined today, it's more two separating the rich, the poor. Black people never used to have what you call rich and the poor, because those who did not have, the have-nots would be looked after by the haves. And that is now being obliterated as well. So what we are saying is that we need, as Africans, leave these things to African systems, our cultures and traditions, to deal with issues that we are seeing again coming up. Because the constitutions that is based on a foreign influence is actually the one that is costing all of these things, because our people are not able to deal with these things effectively, purely because they are subjected to the rule of law that is also imposed on them by the very same powers. I think I've covered these areas for all the questions that were raised earlier on. Thank you.
Now I'll be posing my question to the chief. Khosana Koketso Rakudu. O itse dinako tse dingwe o botlare ekete o lekiwa tumelo ha go tu o botse Khosana potso as an MC ka one. O ipotse gore go mmotse thata. Anka sere ka mosa ne o ska namela serala seo go bana motho le dipotso tse di thatanyana. I'm just saying Khosana, I hope o tla nkinela matsogo mo meeting. I was just passing by. Khosana, because you are a modern person and you are also playing a role of leading the traditional affairs, you're leading people that are educated, people that are not educated, rich, poor people. Now, tell me, how do you balance being a chief and being a psychologist at the same time? And now, your role in psychology, since when COVID-19 has started, I think you will agree with me, many people have been affected. Let's just put it in brackets and say, in terms of mental health, many people have been affected. Now, Ole Khosana, what role have you played in your community to assist them?
All right, thank you so much for that question. Based on what you have asked me, let me start by explaining the hierarchy of the Royal Bafokeng Nation. In the Royal Bafokeng Nation, we've got our current ruling king, who is King Leruo Tsekedi Molutlehi. Under him, we've got 72 clans and 5 regions. As the Khosana, I am the 72th one, the youngest one, and I fall under the region of Northeast region. One thing that I have learned, or one thing that COVID-19 has taught me, is that life does not have a reset button. One thing that I have experienced last year during lockdown, it is that moment where, when lockdown took us to sit in our homes for more than 3 months, and I had time to do what I call an inspection. And then I had a mental breakdown because of, as leaders, as a young leader as I am, the expectations from the community, all those issues that were unresolved. I started now to be able to deal with them. I would say those were the demons that I was scared to deal with at the time. But then last year, because I had time to sit and then not to do anything, but just to focus on myself, I had to deal with that. And then in terms of the educational and the how do I deal with the aspect of the education and the psychology of the psychological aspect within my community, is that as a psychologist, really it plays a significant role being a young person within the education industry. Because now I have realized that when I stand before the people, especially in my community of CT, I tend to know that I stand before the people who are educated. Some are not educated, some are old, some are young. So I'm able to integrate the 4 aspects group in making sure that we achieve the vision. Now, in the Royal Bafokeng Nation, we are not just any kind of a nation. We are a nation which is driven by a purpose and also guided by the Vision Plan 2035. As the chief of the community, I am also expected to make sure that I am the one who takes down that vision to my community and to make my community to believe in it and become part of it in the benefit or for the benefit of the growth of my community. Thank you so much for the question. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the answers that I got. They are so motivational, uplifting. There's so much wisdom in the panel of the elderly. Yo, I don't even know what to say. I'll be quickly going to the youth, and I'm gonna ask you guys just one question. Usually, since when we're in the month of Valentine, I think your minds will actually try to move a little bit faster. Not the month of Valentine, I mean the 14th of February, which is Valentine's Day. Let me quickly say this to you. Love isn't passive, right? It's an action which leads to a daily decision, if I may say. Now, what I need to understand is, since when I'm talking about the daily decision, what are you going to do, or what will you do to bring the charm, you know, that love for the young black people, to love their roots, to love who they are, just to understand that being a black person and understanding your culture, it's the greatest thing. What are you gonna do to resuscitate the love in this regard?
I am honestly of the opinion that it all begins at home. It begins in our individual homes, from the type of food that we consume to the kinds of conversations we have with our children and elders, between elders and children. There's a need for intergenerational interactions, which means we should be encouraging the older generations to be engaging with the youngest people within families. We should be encouraging people in our households to ensure that our indigenous foods are included in their diet systems. It's been found that some of our indigenous, I would say, plants, such as what we recall moroho, what is called as wild spinach, have actually even more protein content than what is available in the shops, but yet they're overlooked. Our grains such as sorghum, which we use as batwana to make our mabele matingi, they are often now just have been regulated to being used during ceremonies or traditional observations, whereas before they were part and parcel of our diet. It's small things such as those, because once you begin to actually live being, I would say in my instance, Motswana, or being black, then it becomes a part of your natural life, because when you then step out of the household, you carry with you and take those traditions and customs with you. So we should encourage that from within our homes, the names we give our children, the idioms and proverbs that we use within our schools, the types of music that we're also sort of exposed to. There was a surge back in the day of a music movement called Motswako. And to take from the late WHP, who said, his is to make Setswana fashionable. And I would say that he did have that kind of an impact, because his music was played across not just amongst Tswana people, but the continent and the country as a whole. So it's really about us all looking down and seeing, how do we make our culture also a part of what is deemed popular culture? How do we make people proud to be able to recite their lineages, their clans, to know where it is that they come from? How do we make people proud of their communities? That is what we need to be looking at, and all of that begins through the conversations that we have within our households. Thank you.
You are my brother, you are my sister, we are family, we are one. You are my brother, you are my sister, we are family, knitted together, we are one. We are family, we are one. We are family, single seed, different walks and different histories. One culture, yes, we a family. Many see the light, some are on the way. Many run from the call of their old play. Like-minded with ancient of the ages, we stand spirit drawn, first we initiate. You may find yourself at a place where you want to stand up for what most folks won't expect to. But don't let your pride change that vibe. Welcome to the family of truth. Well, it comes to mind we're different lifelines, though we emanate from the true vine. Now, I give to you, but you don't owe me. Just pass it on, cause that's how we stay free. Though we may have different points of view, we are on the same, cause we've drawn from the truth. We're family of a single tree. We all bear fruit of a single seed. Different walks and different histories. One culture, yes, we are family.
And for all the speakers that has answered the questions, firstly, I would like to start with the one of the young people. That, you know, there is this word that says, charity begins at home. That means that is where the family is starting. And without the family, there's no community, there's no nation. The cause of everything that is happening currently to our young people, it is because of a black family has lost their identity. Because of the influence of diversified culture. We have adopted different cultures and has put them in our system and the system of governance. So it's time for African traditional leaders, parents, the community as large, to take their position so that we can also teach our brothers and sisters who went out there as African Americans, struggling or making researches to find their identity back to this African continent. So it is our responsibility as Africans to come up with that model. And I believe we are still going to come up with the model as a representative, especially as we come from a traditional community led by the leadership, the current King Kgosi Leruo Tsekedi Molotleg. Rekunong has also stated the structure that we are having as a traditional governance. That is the model that we will always use when we debate about the black identity, the black family representative, and any diversified culture that is involved in our system of leadership. Hence I call the royal monarchy. So it is very important to drive our youth through mentorship and through courage and with patience, because nowadays we as parents, we are impatient with the behavior of our young people. Instead of finding the cause, there is suicidal, there's depression that is taking up and destroying the identity of our young people. And how will we maintain or sustain or retain them to have a drive to know their culture, to know their traditions, to maintain their traditions and values? Hence the slave queen question was also uttered or mentioned. What is that? That is a colonization term we don't have in our traditions. As Motswana, when I grew as a young girl, I didn't know anything about slave queen and whatever. That shows that our young people are influenced and adopting the lifestyle that is not going to give them an identity as black or as Africans. So it is our responsibility as parents at home. I know there's change of technology. We always give that excuse of technology, of economy, of whatever. But I believe that our identity, where we come from, remains a strong hold to us as black family. The last part was more of the leadership. And what is happening is the leadership is there, And I remember in my speech earlier, I said, African Americans, you are in us, we are in you. Without your identity, you'll never know where you come from. And that is where the bloodline issue or the generational curse, because you don't take care of or preserve, like Dr. Carter G. Woodson has stated and maintained for us to have this legacy today. The last one that I will share with you is of the response to what Kumo has just given about the current influence of religious in our belief system of saying our ancestors are demons. That I will say it's a manipulation, because at the end of the day we must remember God created our ancestors. That is why we are here today. It is just that we confuse the ancestral lineage with the occult practices, and that is where we miss the point. Because at the end of the day, even in the Bible, we still have ancestors. Jacob as Israel, we have Abraham as our ancestors. So when God created that, he knew that it will flow through our traditional morals and values, our traditional systems. Hence we have the kings, and that can be preserved, that can be inherited by our young people if we take our position as black family and not allow the influence of colonization or any influence that is defying our culture, taking away our identity. I repeated that there's still more programs that we are going to run as this team within our nation. I'm blessed that my nation, the culture and tradition are still practiced. We still have the king, we still have the headmen we call the chiefs, and we still have the elected councillors, representative of communities, and we have partnership of memorandum of understanding with the political elected councillors. But all in all, that every system, every strategy, every vision comes from the monarchy, from the royal monarchy. And we know that, and we are going to promote it as a model to international black families, to say we still have our identity and we are going to inherit and preserve it for the sake of our ancestors. Our ancestors, we remember them. It's a memory of the legacy, like Dr. Carter G. Woodson. It's our ancestors who has given us the wisdom as a baton for us to take over the black history, to take over that baton and hand it over to our young people so that we maintain the black family. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you so much again to the young people right there. Their answers are forever quick. That's what I love about young people. They're always vibrant. My name is Nonhlanhla Edith Mhlongo. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for being such a beautiful audience. On my social media platforms, my name is Edith Nonhlanhla Mhlongo, and you can also contact me on my email. It's edithmhlongo@yahoo.com. Thank you so much. I'm going to be asking in closing, as the program has came to the end, I would love us to all stand as Mr. Kopano will be giving us the national anthem, but I'm going to request that we all become silent as he will be performing alone. Thank you so much.
Nkosi sikeleli Afrika, maluphakanyisu phondo lwayo, izwa imithandazo yethu. Nkosi sikelela thina lusapho lwayo, murena boluka sitshaba sa Jesu, ufedise dintwa le matshwenyeho, o sibuluke sitshaba sa Jesu, sitshaba sa South Africa, South Africa. die Blau van onze Himmel, uit die diepte van ons je, voor ons eeuwige gebergtes, waar die kranse antwoord geeft, sounds the call to come together, and united we shall stand. Let us live and strive for freedom in South Africa.